The fluorescent lights of Hope Children's Hospital buzzed faintly, casting a sterile glow over the polished floors of the pediatric wing. Isaac Johnson, a 35-year-old maintenance worker, pushed his heavy cart through the familiar corridors, the wheels squeaking softly against the linoleum. His dark skin glistened slightly under the lights, and his navy blue work uniform, patched at the knees, bore the wear of years spent fixing leaks, replacing bulbs, and keeping the hospital running. Isaac's hands, calloused from labor, gripped the cart's handle with a quiet strength, but it was his warm brown eyes that set him apart. They carried a gentleness that seemed out of place in the clinical environment, a kindness that lingered on every child he passed. He'd been at Hope for 4 years, a job he took after a tumultuous childhood and a stint in the Army that left him with scars both visible and hidden. Now studying child psychology at night school, Isaac had found a purpose in the hospital's chaos, connecting with the young patients who filled these halls with both hope and an heartbreak. He'd pause to wave at a boy in a wheelchair or offer a reassuring smile to a girl clutching her IV pole, his presence a quiet comfort in a place where fear often lingered. Isaac's routine was predictable. Check the maintenance logs, fix what was broken, and move on. But he always made time for the kids. He'd learned their names: Tommy in room 312, who loved dinosaurs; Aisha in the oncology ward, who drew him pictures of stars. His colleagues, from nurses to janitors, knew him as the guy who'd stop to chat with a nervous parent or help a lost visitor navigate the hospital's labyrinthine layout. Isaac didn't see his job as just fixing things. He saw it as tending to the heartbeat of the hospital, where every light bulb changed or pipe repaired made life a little easier for those fighting bigger battles. That morning, as he maneuvered his cart toward the speech therapy wing, the air felt heavier than usual. The wing was quieter, the usual chatter of children muted, replaced by the low hum of medical equipment and the occasional murmur of voices behind closed doors. Isaac was scheduled to replace a flickering light fixture in one of the therapy rooms, a task he'd done countless times. But as he approached room 204, raised voices spilled through the partially open door, sharp and laced with desperation. "This is unacceptable." The voice belonged to a man, his tone clipped and authoritative, the kind that commanded boardrooms. Isaac slowed his cart, not wanting to intrude, but unable to ignore the intensity of the conversation. Peering through the crack in the door, he saw a man in a tailored gray suit, his polished shoes gleaming under the fluorescent light. His face was flushed, his hands gesturing sharply as he spoke. Across from him stood a woman in a professional blazer. Her arms crossed, her expression calm but strained. She was clearly a therapist, her badge clipped to her pocket, her clipboard resting on a nearby table. "Mr. Whitaker, I understand your frustration," she said, her voice steady but tinged with fatigue. "But Lily's condition is complex. Selective mutism after trauma isn't something we can force. She hasn't lost her ability to speak physically, it's emotional. She needs time to feel safe again." The man, Mr. Whitaker, let out a sharp exhale, his shoulders slumping slightly. "Time. How much more time? It's been months since the accident. She used to sing laugh talk non-stop. Now she's gone. I'm losing her, and all the specialists I've hired, all the money I've spent, it's done nothing." Isaac's gaze shifted to the small figure in the room. A girl no older than 4 sat on a cushioned chair, her blonde curls framing a pale face. Her pink dress, adorned with tiny flowers, hung loosely on her fragile frame, and her hands rested limply in her lap. Her blue eyes stared blankly at the wall, unblinking, as if she existed in a world separate from the one around her. Lily, Isaac thought, catching her name from the conversation. She looked like a porcelain doll, beautiful but lifeless, her silence a shield against a world that had hurt her. The therapist knelt beside her, holding up a card with a picture of a dog. "Lily, can you point to the puppy? Or maybe say, Duck." The girl didn't move, didn't blink, her expression unchanging. The therapist tried again, her voice gentle but insistent, offering toys, cards, anything to spark a response. Nothing. Mr. Whitaker knelt beside his daughter, his expensive suit crumpling as he reached for her hand. "Lily, sweetheart, it's Daddy. Can you look at me? Can you say anything?" His voice cracked raw with a pain that cut through the room. Isaac felt a pang in his chest. He recognized that pain not just from his psychology textbooks, but from his own life. Growing up in a rough neighborhood, he'd seen trauma etch itself into people's faces, their voices, their silences. In the army, he'd watched friends retreat into themselves after missions gone wrong, their words stolen by memories too heavy to carry. And he'd felt it himself, those moments, when the world felt too loud, too cruel, and silence was the only safe place left. Lily's stillness wasn't just a symptom. It was a fortress she'd built to protect herself. Isaac lingered by the door, his cart forgotten as the session ended. The therapist gathered her materials, her face tight with the weight of another failed attempt. Mr. Whitaker scooped Lily into his arms, her body limp, her eyes still fixed on some distant point. As they stepped into the corridor, Isaac straightened his heart, urging him to act despite the risk of overstepping. "Excuse me," he said, his voice low but steady. Mr. Whitaker turned his face a mix of exhaustion and irritation, clearly expecting another well-meaning but useless suggestion. "I'm Isaac Johnson, maintenance staff here. I couldn't help overhearing. I know it's not my place, but I've got some experience with kids who've been through trauma. Would you be open to me spending some time with Lily?" Mr. Whitaker's eyes narrowed, taking in Isaac's worn uniform, the toolbox on his cart. "You're a janitor," he said, not unkindly, but with a skepticism that stung. "I've hired the best child psychologists, speech therapists, you name it. What makes you think you can help?" Isaac held his gaze unfazed. "I get it, sir. You've got every reason to doubt me. But sometimes kids like Lily don't need fixing. They need someone to just be there, no pressure, no expectations. I'm not a therapist, but I know what it's like to feel the world's too much. I'd just like to sit with her, let her know she's safe." Mr. Whitaker studied him, his jaw tight. In his arms, Lily remained still, her silence louder than any words. "What qualifications do you have?" he asked, his voice softer now, tinged with desperation. "I'm studying child psychology, and I've seen trauma up close. Army days, tough times growing up. But more than that, I know what it's like to need someone to just stay. Not push, not demand, just stay." Isaac's words hung in the air, simple but heavy with truth. Something shifted in Mr. Whitaker's expression, a flicker of hope, or maybe just exhaustion giving way to curiosity. He glanced at Lily, then back at Isaac. "What exactly are you proposing?" "Just time with her during my breaks. No therapy, no goals, just letting her know someone's there. No strings attached." Mr. Whitaker hesitated, his wealth and status useless against the wall of his daughter's silence. Finally he nodded. "Fine. Her next visit is in 2 days. You can try, but don't get my hopes up for nothing." Isaac nodded, his heart steady, but his mind racing. He knew this wasn't about proving himself, it was about Lily. As Mr. Whitaker carried his daughter away, Isaac returned to his cart, the flickering light fixture still waiting. But his thoughts were on the little girl locked in her silent world, and the fragile thread of trust he'd just been given. He didn't know if he could help her, but he knew he'd try not with grand gestures or expertise, but with the quiet, steady presence he'd always offered the kids in these halls. The hospital hummed around him, a place of healing and heartbreak, and Isaac felt the weight of a new responsibility settle on his shoulders. It wasn't just about fixing lights anymore. It was about helping a child find her way back to the world. The morning sun filtered through the leaves of the hospital's garden courtyard, casting dappled shadows on the cobblestone path, where Isaac Johnson sat on a wooden bench. His maintenance cart was parked nearby, its tools and cleaning supplies untouched for the moment, as he took his lunch break in the quiet oasis tucked behind Hope Children's Hospital. The garden was a small haven with blooming marigolds, a trickling fountain, and a few sparrows flitting between low branches. Isaac's navy blue uniform was slightly rumpled, his work boots scuffed, but his posture was relaxed, his hands resting loosely in his lap. At 35, he carried the weight of a life that had seen its share of hardship, growing up in a neighborhood where gunshots were more common than birdsong, followed by years in the army where silence often meant survival. Now, studying child psychology at night school, he was learning to translate those experiences into something softer, something that could reach a child like Lily Whitaker, the 4-year-old girl whose silence had gripped his heart 2 days ago. Lily sat beside him on the bench, her small frame rigid, her pink sneakers barely touching the ground. Her blonde curls caught the sunlight, but her blue eyes remained fixed on the horizon, unseeing, as if the world around her was a distant memory. She hadn't spoken since the accident months ago, a trauma that had locked her voice away, and her father, James Whitaker, had all but given up on the specialists who'd failed her. Isaac had convinced James to let him try a different approach, not therapy, not treatment, but simply being present. No pressure, no demands, just a quiet space where Lily could feel safe. It was their first session, if you could call it that, and Isaac was determined to keep his promise. He didn't bring flashcards or toys, didn't ask her to speak or even look at him. Instead, he pulled a worn paperback from his pocket, a children's book about animals he'd borrowed from the hospital's library, Nil Library. He opened it to a page with a picture of a turtle and began to read aloud, his voice low and steady, like a gentle hum. "You know, Lily," he said, not looking at her, letting his words drift into the air, "turtles are pretty special. When the world gets too scary, they just pull into their shells and wait till it feels safe again. Smart, right? They take their time, no rush." He turned the page, glancing at her from the corner of his eye. She hadn't moved, her hands folded tightly in her lap, but her shoulders seemed a fraction less tense, her breathing a little slower. Isaac kept his tone casual, as if he were talking to himself. "I used to wish I was a turtle sometimes, back when I was a kid. Life got loud, I'd imagine pulling into a shell where nobody could bother me." He chuckled softly, the sound warm and unforced. Lily didn't respond, but Isaac hadn't expected her to. He was planting seeds, not digging for results. He read on, describing how turtles carried their homes on their backs, how they moved slow but steady, always finding their way. James Whitaker watched from a distance, leaning against a tree near the garden's edge. His tailored suit looked out of place among the flowers, his arms crossed tightly, his face a mix of skepticism and desperation. He'd agreed to let Isaac try, but his faith was thin, worn down by months of disappointment. The best child, psychologists, speech therapists, and neurologists money could buy, had failed to break through Lily's silence. And now here was a maintenance worker, a black man with no formal credentials, sitting with his daughter and reading about turtles. James wanted to interrupt, to demand a plan, a timeline, but something held him back. Maybe the calm in Isaac's voice, or the way Lily's fingers had stopped clutching her dress so tightly. Isaac closed the book and set it beside him, leaning back on the bench. "You ever notice how this garden feels different from the rest of the hospital?" he said, his eyes scanning the marigolds. "It's like the world slows down out here. The birds don't care about schedules. The flowers just grow when they're ready." He paused, letting the silence settle. "Kinda like people, I guess." He didn't push Lily to respond, didn't even look at her directly. Instead, he picked up a small stick and traced patterns in the dirt at his feet. A spiral, a star, a wavy line. "When I was little," he said, "I used to draw in the dirt like this when I needed to think. Helped me feel steady, you know." He glanced at her, quick and subtle, catching the faintest shift in her posture, a slight lean toward the patterns he was drawing. It was small, but it was something. Isaac kept talking, his voice a gentle stream, sharing stories about the animals in the book, about how rabbits freeze when they're scared, how owls stay quiet to listen to the world. He wove in bits of his own life carefully, not to burden her, but to let her know he understood. "I had a tough time talking sometimes growing up. Felt like the world was too big, too noisy. But I found out it's okay to take your time, to wait till you're ready to come out of your shell." James stepped closer, his polished shoes crunching on the path. "How's this supposed to help her?" he asked, his voice sharp but quieter than before, tinged with curiosity. Isaac looked up, his expression calm but firm. "Mr. Whitaker, it's not about making her talk. It's about letting her know she doesn't have to. She's in there somewhere, but she's scared. I'm just giving her a safe place to be, that's all." James frowned, his jaw tight. "And you think that's enough?" Isaac shrugged, his smile faint but genuine. "It's a start. Sometimes that's all a kid needs, someone to sit with them while they figure it out." James looked at Lily, whose eyes had drifted to the dirt patterns, though her face remained blank. He wanted to argue, to demand more, but he stayed silent, watching as Isaac picked up the book again and flipped to a page about butterflies. "Butterflies are my favorite," Isaac said, his voice warm. "They start out as caterpillars, all wrapped up in a cocoon. They stay there safe and quiet till they're ready to come out and fly. Takes time, but when they do, there's something else." He traced a butterfly shape in the dirt, slow and deliberate. "I bet you'd like butterflies, Lily. They're like little pieces of the sky." Her fingers twitched just slightly, and Isaac's heart lifted, though he kept his face neutral. He didn't want to scare her off by noticing too much. Instead, he leaned back and started humming a soft tune, an old lullaby his grandmother used to sing. The notes floated through the garden, blending with the sound of the fountain and the rustling leaves. James shifted uncomfortably, checking his watch. But he didn't leave. He watched his daughter, searching for any sign of change, any crack in the wall she'd built around herself. Isaac spent the rest of his break like this, alternating between reading, talking, and humming, always keeping his voice low, his movements unhurried. He told Lily about the sparrows that hopped nearby, how they chirped to each other like they were sharing secrets. He described the marigolds, how they turned their faces to the sun, soaking up light to grow strong. He didn't ask her questions, didn't push her to engage. He just filled the space with stories and sounds, creating a bubble of calm around them. When his break ended, he stood brushing dirt off his hands. "Gotta get back to work, Lily," he said gently. "But I'll be here tomorrow, okay? Maybe we'll read about rabbits next time." He nodded at James, who was still standing there, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Whitaker, I'll see you both soon." As Isaac pushed his cart away, he glanced back, and saw Lily's eyes flicker toward the butterfly pattern in the dirt. It was fleeting, but it was real. James caught up with him near the garden's exit, his voice low. "I don't get it, Isaac. You're just sitting there talking about animals. How's that going to fix her?" Isaac stopped, turning to face him. "It's not about fixing her, sir. It's about showing her the world's not all bad. She's been through something that made her hide. I'm just letting her know it's okay to peek out when she's ready." James stared at him, his eyes searching for something to hold on to. "And if she's never ready?" Isaac's voice softened. "Then she's still Lily, and that's enough. But I think she'll get there. She just needs time and someone to walk with her." James nodded slowly, his throat tight. As Isaac walked away, he felt a quiet resolve settle in his chest. This was only the beginning, but it was a beginning. Lily was still in there, and he'd be there too, waiting as long as it took. The air in the garden courtyard of Hope Children's Hospital carried a faint sweetness from the blooming jasmine, mingling with the earthy scent of freshly turned soil. Isaac Johnson sat cross-legged on a soft patch of grass, his navy blue uniform slightly wrinkled from a morning spent repairing a leaky pipe in the oncology ward. His toolbox rested nearby, but for now his focus was on the small canvas bag beside him, filled with art supplies he'd scrounged from the hospital's activity room, crayons, markers, and a stack of plain paper. At 35, Isaac's broad shoulders and calloused hands spoke of years of hard work, but his warm brown eyes held a patience that seemed to soften the world around him. He'd been meeting Lily Whitaker, the 4-year-old girl locked in silence since a traumatic accident, for nearly 3 weeks now. Their time together in the garden had become a ritual, quiet moments filled with stories, soft humming, and a deliberate absence of pressure. Isaac wasn't trying to fix Lily. He was giving her a space to exist, to breathe, to feel safe. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, she was responding. Lily sat a few feet away, her small frame perched on a low stool Isaac had brought from the maintenance closet. Her blonde curls were tied back with a blue ribbon, and her pink dress was smudged with dirt from the garden path. Her blue eyes, once fixed on some distant point, now occasionally darted toward the world around her, the flutter of a sparrow, the ripple of the fountain. She hadn't spoken yet, but Isaac had noticed subtle changes. Her shoulders no longer hunched as tightly, her fingers sometimes twitched, as if reaching for something. Today he decided to try something new. He pulled a sheet of paper from the bag and set it on the ground between them, placing a few crayons beside it. "You know, Lily," he said, his voice as steady as ever, "when I was a kid, I used to draw when things got heavy. Didn't have to be anything special, just colors, shapes, whatever came to mind." He picked up a blue crayon and drew a simple wave. Like water rolling across the page. Kinda like the fountain over there, always moving, always making its own music. Lily's eyes flicked to the paper lingering on the blue lines. Isaac didn't push her to join in. He just kept drawing, adding a green hill, a yellow sun. "This is what I think the garden looks like," he said, his tone light. "But I bet you see it different. Maybe you'd draw the flowers bigger, or add a bird or two." He slid another sheet of paper toward her, setting a red crayon on top. She didn't move, but her gaze stayed on the paper, her fingers twitching again. Isaac hummed softly, an old folk tune his mother used to sing, and switched to a purple crayon sketching a lopsided butterfly. "Butterflies are tricky to draw," he said, chuckling. "Their wings are all fancy, like they're showing off for the flowers." He glanced at her, catching the faintest tilt of her head, as if she were studying his drawing. It was small, but it was progress, and Isaac's heart lifted, though he kept his expression neutral. James Whitaker stood near the garden's edge, his tailored suit replaced by a more casual jacket and slacks. a sign he was spending less time in boardrooms and more time here, watching his daughter. His face still carried the weight of months of worry, but the sharp edge of his skepticism had softened. He'd seen the changes in Lily, nothing dramatic, but enough to keep him coming back. The way she leaned slightly toward Isaac's stories, the way her hands no longer clenched her dress so tightly. He'd started to trust Isaac, though he didn't fully understand why a maintenance worker's quiet presence was doing what specialists couldn't. James stepped closer, his shoes quiet on the grass. "What's with the crayons?" he asked, his voice low, curious rather than demanding. Isaac looked up, smiling faintly. "Just another way to be here, Mr. Whitaker. Sometimes kids need to see the world through colors before they feel like talking about it." Isaac turned back to the paper, adding a red flower to his drawing. "This one's a marigold, like those over there," he said, nodding toward the flower bed. "They're tough, you know. They grow even when the ground's not perfect." He didn't look at Lily, but he saw her hand inch toward the red crayon, her fingers brushing it lightly. His heart skipped, but he kept drawing, kept talking. "When I was in the army, I'd see flowers like that sometimes popping up in the middle of nowhere. Made me think the world's got a way of keeping beautiful things alive, no matter what." Lily's hand closed around the crayon, her movements slow, deliberate. She didn't draw, just held it, her eyes fixed on the paper. Isaac hummed again, switching to a green crayon to add grass to his picture. "You know what's cool about drawing," he said. "It's like telling a story without words. You can show what's in your head, and nobody's got to understand it. But you." James crouched nearby, watching his daughter with a mix of hope and fear. He wanted to urge her to draw, to do something, but he held back, remembering Isaac's words about patience. Isaac started a new drawing this time, a simple tree with sprawling branches. "Trees are like people, I think," he said. "They've got roots deep down, holding them steady, even when the wind's rough." He glanced at Lily, who was still holding the crayon, her grip a little tighter now. "You want to add a leaf or two? No rush, just if you feel like it." He slid the paper closer, not expecting a response, but leaving the door open. To his surprise, Lily leaned forward, her small hand trembling as she pressed the red crayon to the paper. She drew a single wobbly line, a curve that might have been a petal or a leaf. It was barely anything, but to Isaac it was everything. He kept his voice steady, his smile soft. "That's a good one, Lily. Looks like it belongs right there." James's breath caught his eyes locked on the red mark. He started to speak, but Isaac raised a hand slightly, signaling him to stay quiet. Lily set the crayon down, her face still blank, but her shoulders relaxed, her hands resting loosely in her lap. Isaac started humming again, this time a children's song about a little bird learning to fly. He picked up a yellow crayon and added a sun to Lily's paper next to her red curve. "Looks like your petals got some sunshine now," he said, his tone warm. "Maybe tomorrow we'll add a whole garden." Lily didn't respond, but her eyes lingered on the paper, and for the first time Isaac saw a flicker of curiosity in her gaze. He kept the moment light switching to a new song, his voice blending with the garden's sounds, the fountain's trickle, the sparrow's chirps. He didn't push her to draw more, didn't ask for anything. He just kept creating, adding colors and shapes, letting her see that the world could be safe, even beautiful. James stood brushing grass off his knees. "She drew something," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might break the spell. Isaac nodded, his eyes still on the paper. "She did. It's a start, Mr. Whitaker. She's finding her way little by little." James looked at his daughter, his throat tight. "Why's this working? You're not doing anything special, just drawing singing." Isaac chuckled softly, setting the crayons down. Sometimes that's what a kid needs, sir. Not a doctor, not a plan, just someone to share the world with them, no strings attached. She's still in there, and she's starting to peek out. James nodded, his eyes drifting to Lily, who was now watching a sparrow hop across the path. He wanted to believe Isaac, but doubt still gnawed at him. He'd spent a fortune on experts, yet this man with his crayons and quiet voice was reaching his daughter in ways they couldn't. Isaac packed up the art supplies, leaving Lily's paper on the ground in case she wanted to look at it again. "Gotta get back to work," he said, standing and brushing dirt off his uniform. "But I'll be here tomorrow, Lily. Maybe we'll try some music next time. You ever hear a guitar? I'm no pro, but I can strum a tune or two." He nodded at James, who was still watching his daughter, his face a mix of hope and uncertainty. As Isaac pushed his cart back toward the hospital, he glanced over his shoulder. Lily was still sitting on the stool, her eyes on the red curve she'd drawn. It wasn't much, but it was a crack in the wall. She'd built a tiny window into the girl she used to be. Isaac felt a quiet surge of hope, not for himself, but for her. He knew healing wasn't linear, that it took time and trust, but he was ready to keep showing up, to keep offering her a safe place to land. The garden seemed brighter. As he walked away, the jasmine's scent lingering, a reminder that even in the hardest places, something beautiful could grow. The garden courtyard at Hope Children's Hospital was bathed in the golden light of late afternoon, the marigolds and jasmine glowing as if they'd soaked up the sun's warmth all day. Isaac Johnson knelt beside a flower bed, his hands gently patting soil around a newly planted daisy, his navy blue uniform streaked with dirt. At 35, he carried the quiet strength of someone who'd seen the world's rough edges, his childhood in a neighborhood where hope was scarce, his years in the army, where silence often meant survival. But now, as he worked in the garden, his warm brown eyes held a softness that seemed to draw the children of the hospital toward him. For 6 weeks he'd spent his lunch breaks with Lily Whitaker, the 4-year-old girl who'd retreated into silence after a traumatic accident. What began as a simple offer to sit with her had grown into something profound. A bridge of trust, built not with expertise, but with patient stories and a presence that asked for nothing in return. Today, Lily sat nearby on her familiar stool, her blonde curls bouncing as she leaned forward, her small hands clutching a watering can. Her blue eyes, once vacant, now sparkled with a cautious curiosity, following a ladybug as it crawled across a leaf. Isaac had watched her change over the weeks, each small step a victory. First, it was the way her shoulders relaxed, then the fleeting glances at his drawings, and then, a week ago, a breakthrough that still made his heart swell, a single whispered word flower, as she pointed to a marigold. Since then, she'd started speaking in soft, halting phrases, bird sky yellow, always tied to the world around her, never in response to questions or prompts. Isaac knew these weren't just words. They were Lily, reclaiming her place in a world that had once hurt her. He'd kept their time together, simple weaving in art songs and stories about nature, always letting her set the pace. Today, he'd brought a small guitar from home, its wood worn but polished, a gift from his uncle years ago. He strummed a gentle chord, the notes mingling with the fountain's trickle. "This one's for the flowers, Lily," he said, his voice warm. "They like music, you know, makes 'em grow taller." She tilted her head, her lips twitching in what might have been a smile, and Isaac felt a surge of hope. James Whitaker stood near the garden's edge, his usual suit replaced by a sweater and jeans, a sign he was spending less time in corporate offices and more time here watching his daughter come back to life. The desperation that once defined him had softened, replaced by a quiet awe. He'd seen Lily draw a wobbly flower, hum a fragment of a tune, and now speak small words, but words nonetheless. The specialists he'd hired with their degrees and techniques hadn't reached her, but Isaac, a maintenance worker with no formal training, had. James stepped closer, his hands in his pockets, his eyes fixed on Lily as she sprinkled water on the daisies. "She's talking," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. "Not a lot, but it's her." Isaac nodded, strumming another chord. "She's finding her way, Mr. Whitaker. Little by little, she's remembering how to be Lily." Isaac set the guitar down and handed Lily a small trowel. "Want to help me plant another one?" he asked, his tone light. She nodded, a real nod, deliberate and clear, and took the trowel, her small hands careful as she dug a shallow hole. "Good spot," Isaac said, placing a daisy's roots into the soil. "This one's gonna be happy here, thanks to you." Lily's lips moved, and after a moment she whispered, "Happy flower." The words were soft, but they hung in the air like music, and Isaac's eyes stung, though he kept his smile steady. James crouched beside them, his breath catching. "That's right, sweetheart," he said, his voice thick. "Happy flower." Lily glanced at him, her eyes meeting his for the first time in months, and James froze, afraid to break the moment. Isaac strummed the guitar again, filling the silence with a gentle melody, giving Lily space to exist without pressure. The weeks had built to this, a slow, steady unfolding. Isaac had never pushed Lily, never demanded she perform. He'd drawn with her, sung to her, told her stories of turtles and butterflies, always letting her know she was enough as she was. Each small gesture, a glance, a line drawn, a whispered word was a step out of the cocoon she'd wrapped herself in. James had started joining their sessions, not just observing, but participating, drawing clumsy suns humming along to Isaac's tunes. He was learning, too, that healing wasn't about fixing, but about being present, about letting Lily lead. Isaac looked at them now, father and daughter, side by side in the dirt, and felt a quiet pride. "You know," he said, his voice soft, "this garden's starting to look like a real home for these plants. Kinda like how people need a home to feel safe, right?" "Lily." She didn't answer, but her fingers brushed the daisy's petals and she whispered, "Soft." James stood brushing soil off his hands. "Isaac," he said, his voice steady but heavy with emotion, "you've done what I thought was impossible. She's coming back. I meant it when I said I'd give you everything. Name it." Isaac shook his head, his smile gentle. "Mr. Whitaker, I didn't do this for anything. I did it for her. But if you want to do something, maybe think about other kids like Lily. They need places like this, people who'll sit with them, no strings attached." James nodded, his mind already turning. "What if we built something here? A program, a center for kids who've been through trauma. Not just therapy, but what you do." Isaac's eyes lit up, though he kept his voice calm. "That'd be something, sir. A place where kids can heal at their own pace with people who care." The idea took root, and over the next weeks, James threw his resources behind it. He met with hospital administrators, therapists, and Isaac sketching out plans for the Whitaker Family Healing Center. It would combine traditional therapy with spaces like the garden places for art, music, and connection where children could rebuild trust in their own time. Isaac helped shape the vision, drawing on his night school studies and his own instincts. He wasn't a doctor, but he understood trauma's weight, the way it could silence a soul, and the way love and patience could coax it back. Lily, now 5, became the center's unofficial mascot, her chatter growing louder each day. She'd run through the garden, calling out to happy flowers and singing birds, her voice a melody that filled James's heart and inspired other families. The center's opening day was a quiet affair, but the courtyard was alive with children drawing, planting, and laughing, their parents watching with cautious hope. As the sun set on the garden, Isaac sat with Lily strumming his guitar while she drew a picture of a butterfly, her crayons bold and bright. "Mr. Isaac," she said, her voice clear now, "does the butterfly know it's pretty?" He smiled, his heart full. "I think it does, Lily, but it's prettiest when it flies, when it's free to be itself." She nodded, adding a red wing to her drawing. James watched from a bench, his eyes misty. He'd built empires, but this small, vibrant girl and the man who'd given her back to him was his greatest achievement. The lesson was clear, not just for him, but for everyone the center would touch. Healing wasn't about forcing change, but about creating a space where it could happen naturally. It was about love, patience, and seeing someone for who they were, not what they could do. Isaac had shown them that not with grand gestures, but with quiet moments, with crayons and songs, and a heart that refused to give up. The garden glowed as evening settled, the daisies standing tall, the fountain singing softly. Isaac packed up his guitar, his work boots heavy with soil. "Time to head back, Lily," he said. "But we'll plant more tomorrow." "Yeah," she nodded, clutching her drawing. "For the butterflies," she said, and Isaac laughed, the sound echoing through the courtyard. As they walked hand in hand toward the hospital, James followed his steps lighter than they'd been in months. The Whitaker Family Healing Center was just beginning, but its roots were already deep nourished by a simple truth. Sometimes the most profound healing comes from being seen, being heard, being loved, exactly as you are. And in that garden, where a maintenance worker and a little girl had built a bridge of trust, the truth would grow, touching lives far beyond the hospital's walls.